So, state of the nation. Tell us where we are with the plumbing in the US addressable market today. What progress have we made in the last 10 years?
I think that the fact that Sorensen actually got the capability up and running was a huge win for the industry. And I think we all learned a lot from that. I mean, with the OR project, we like to say that we didn't invent any of this, but we stole all of this from a bunch of other people. What we really mean by that, and everybody's heard me say this, is I like to think that we learned lessons from previous attempts at this. So there are a lot of people walking around with bruises. There are a lot of people that got educated off the backs of those bruises. I think we are closer to scale than we have ever been. And the efforts of people like Tracy Shapak and Mike Bologna and a lot of people in this room, and Kelly and what Nielsen's doing, we're getting there. There's still a ton of work to do, but I think we are exponentially closer to having addressable at scale on live linear today than we were 10 years ago.
Well done, everybody. That's progress. Adam, are you on precisely the same page?
I am on the same page, but I'll add some pieces to that. So I agree with you. I mean, we all collectively have been working on this for a long, long time. We do have some bruises and scars. There's been a lot of teaching, a lot of trials and tribulations. I think Canoe was one of them as well. Got some laughs, but yes, it was. Some of us were there. In terms of where we're going, what's happening, I think that a big accelerator right now, from where I see it, and I was at Canoe, I was at Dish for a while, pounding the pavement, and then cross-platform with Sling and trying to do that, and now with Telaria. I think the OTT, CTV world, the digital underpinnings of how we're serving ads, it is one-to-one targeting. That's what addressable is, using data behind it to go ahead and deliver ads only to who or household, we could say, you need to deliver to, and I think that is going to and is starting to speed up the process really, really fast from how it's being delivered. So that is a big change to all this. So all these things that we're putting together in the traditional television space and delivering direct to home through the satellites, now what you're doing with OR and all that, awesome, great, we need that. And now as I'm seeing it and living and breathing it, the digital underpinnings of delivery right now, it's all addressable. And that's going to speed up the entire, and is speeding up the entire process of addressable advertising.
And briefly, as we sit here in 2020, which bits aren't working well?
What isn't working well?
Yeah, from a plumbing point of view.
Unification, for sure.
Right.
We talked about, I think, universal ID,
And
100%.
right.
That is one thing. There's different ways to look at data sets, different ways to, I think attribution is got some holes in it, but definitely, look, if you're going to sell addressable and maintain the pricing that it commands, you've got to prove it, and that's where attribution still needs some fixing and looking at to do in terms of that. We can talk about education, but what does that mean? It really means we've got to simplify the process in the buying community and through the entire ecosystem to make this really a simple sell. I think that's another thing that really needs to be done. That's not necessarily a technical question, but I'll say this. When you're out there selling addressable, when you're in there, it gets into the weeds so fast of when you're talking to buyers and when you're talking to others, and then you've essentially lost the sell, you've lost the mojo of what's going on because you get so into how it works and all the tech about it, and it's wonderful and great, but I think we have to simplify the process and really state what addressable is when you're out there, and I think that is one of the things we need to fix.
And the thing that I would add in addition to simple selling is the ability to simply count, to actually measure on the backside, and for all of us to be speaking the same language when we're doing that counting.
I want to come onto that because I think that's one of the interesting sticky issues that we haven't quite got to grips with yet. Chris, just quickly, your state of the nation address. Where are we today? What's working well? What isn't?
I'm going to be boring and just agree. I think that we have to give credit over the past 10 years. If you look at where we were at 2010 to where we are today, we've made a tremendous amount of progress. I think that the operators and the companies who have been running addressable programs in Comcast footprint or AT&T footprint or Dish footprint, they've done a tremendous job with what they have. And we've made a lot of progress, and as we continue into a more IP-centric world, things begin to accelerate, new technologies become more available to allow this to scale. However, if you want to continue down a path where ads become more meaningful to the user, and you can protect the privacy of the user and their wishes, as well as create meaningful measurement across all of these screens so that all of this works well at scale, we have a very long way to go. So I think that as we continue through the different programs such as OR and Nielsen and IP-enabled environments and what the operators are doing themselves, we're going to see a tremendous amount of acceleration quickly. And then to kind of go back to what Don was saying and others is, within these environments, we need to focus on interoperability. We need to make sure that we're working together and we're using open standards in a way that works for everyone. Allow the conversations about data and who owns what to happen throughout legal and privacy and business discussions, as opposed to how the technology needs to operate.
Okay, why don't we step back a second? I think we've got a sense of where our three stalwarts of the addressable market think we're at. Jodie, when you talk about addressable, I just want to check that you're talking about the same thing that they're talking about. When you talk about addressable, what are you actually talking about? Do you buy I mean, we had a definition earlier from Ashley.
So look, you could probably ask all three of us how we define addressable, and we'd give three different answers.
That is my suspicion.
I think that, so as a company, Inscape defines addressable as whether it's some sort of modeled segment or one-to-one or the ability to target someone. In the OR conversations that we've been having, we think that, you know, sort of the crawl phase of the concept of addressable is creative versioning. So taking the data that you have at your disposal, understanding what the household makeup is, and then knowing that, okay, so that house has a truck intender in it, so I'm going to serve a truck ad. To us, that's addressable. So whether it's one-to-one, whether it's modeled, it's still the ability to sort of refine your audience and go after a particular audience.
Yeah, addressable to me is delivering the right ad to the right, we could say, household or person at the right time. It's complete one-to-one delivery. Data infused are behind that. I don't think our definitions are so far different. I think we get lost in the delivery.
Go on. What do you mean by that?
Whether it's IP, whether it's through the set-top box or cable or QAM, or I guess that QAM I think might be out. That might be more zonal, but direct to home through satellite. You know, forget about the delivery. It's how it's being done. It's just an ad with a one-to-one delivery as opposed to one-to-many like the broadcast model, and data infused behind that to determine what you want to deliver.
But I think that's almost too narrow of a definition when you're going to talk about one-to-one.
Okay.
Because as an example, if you're targeting on a smart TV, you've got, you know, some sense of who's in the household, but you've got 5 people sitting in front of that TV. So that is not one-to-one addressable. So that's my point about
Household?
Well, household, yes, but not one-to-one individual.
So, okay, that could be the difference. I mean, we could say one-to-one household, which is the cable model, or traditional satellite model, or we could say OEM at this point. However, we will be getting, I believe, to individual over time using certain true optic and stuff like that to go ahead and help to then determine who in the household based on patterns. But I'll say one-to-one household, that's fine. But that is how I look at it, as opposed to doing index or anything like that.
But will we?
I
mean,
believe so.
with CCPA and where privacy is going, I mean, not to
I
take
think
this
with
whole thing
opt-ins
into the
and so
weeds.
on.
If we talk about the plumbing,
Yep.
and if we basically got household level and we've got individual level, and we're bundling those into segments sometimes, but that's fundamentally what we're doing. Different segments are getting different ads. We've got 2 basic options for delivering those ads. We can either do it server side, or we can do it client side. Where are we in relation to those 2 things? Why don't we start with the client side piece? We're basically talking about the satellite platforms, right? Mm-hmm. And
Spot lives in the box.
Yep.
Spot
Spot's
goes,
in the
gets sent
box.
to the box over the bird, and essentially lives in the box and hits its trigger and goes ahead and.
And I talk to true believers of the addressable faith who say that is the most mature body of addressable inventory in the US market today. It's household level addressable. It works against multiple channels. It's there. It's fine, right?
In a satellite delivery, it works. I think to me, it sounds a little bit old and stodgy, and in IP,
Okay, sure.
You just have to ask them what they mean by addressable.
Yeah.
Say, what do you mean by mature?
I mean, it's been deployed for some time.
Okay, fair. It's old.
It's old.
Is what
it
you
works.
mean. Okay,
It always
got
works.
it.
I mean, obviously we have...
But not evolved.
Caroline Horner knows it
Okay.
very
That's
well.
fair.
Yeah. It's old.
But it's been with us for a while. And then we obviously
Yeah,
have
yeah.
we have the cable systems.
Keep in mind the model you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Setting in the set-top box where look, I've kind of, in my career, I've kind of now in programmatic and kind of in IP, so I've kind of like taken this out of my thinking. But yeah, in television, you have to send the spot to the box, over the bird, has to sit in the box. It takes about 3 or 4, maybe a week, days to acquire, and then you go ahead and serve it. That you can call that mature. I call that we've got to move on from that at some point. Granted, delivery's got a long way to, the business has a long way to change, but that's, older thinking.
And we obviously have our cable systems, then we have our IP inventory. And it's
Yes.
the latter, I guess, that everyone is more interested in.
Depends on who you talk to.
Sure.
I think the cable operators and satellite operators are very happy and interested to talk about the models that they have deployed that are working quite well in their definition when they go out and they sell their inventory. I think that when you want to talk about scale and you want to talk about what the next 10 years looks like and you want to talk about how this could work for more people, they would start talking more about the IP-centric model because it's the only way you're going to be able to truly scale this business.
And when you think about the bits that we still need to fix across these different pools of inventory, which bits are most fixed today and which bits do you see as least fixed?
With the exception of, not to get in the weeds on various and sundry solutions that are in the marketplace, there's been a history of signaling issues that I think have gotten better.
Right.
Look, one of the reasons that we went down the path of using a watermark is because a watermark delivers frame accuracy in a more elegant and efficient fashion. It's also got its drawbacks. I don't know that outside of some niggles here and there, I don't know that it's a technical issue really anymore outside of interoperability and standards and everybody sort of working off at least some basic framework, which is the attempt that we're trying to make.
Right.
I think after that, it's all business issues.
I agree with that 100%. The bits that needs to be fixed are the business issues, measurement, kind of unifying all this in the back end and that sort of stuff. I think those are the bits that once they start to get themselves through, we'll start to go ahead and open up addressable cross-platform, one-to-one, i.e. could be household or individual. Let's talk household, it's fine. I think that will open up the floodgates a little bit more. It's starting to happen, but it's going to take some more time. But I think that's the bits that need to be fixed.
There was reference to Canoe earlier, and I'm old enough to know what that is. I think there's a big difference, and several people have heard me say this, between where we are now as an industry and where we were back when Canoe 1.0 got off the ground. When Canoe 1.0 got off the ground, the existential threats that were Netflix, Amazon, Google, and Facebook did not exist, or they were nascent. Now everybody's scared to death. And if we don't start working together, those companies are going to continue to eat TV's lunch.
Chris, you look like you might be keen to get in at this point.
Well, I think that it's easy to look at. I don't think this discussion is about Google versus TV. I think that it's easy to look at one company and say they're out there and they're going to eat your lunch. But there's also a lot of work that we do within this ecosystem to help a lot of companies make a lot of money. And I think we're forming very strong partnerships in inclusion of war, right? To make sure that we can make the TV ecosystem and advertising ecosystem a healthy, sustainable, and scalable business. And that's exactly why we're talking about what the future of addressability is and talking about alignment to IP standards and alignment to not necessarily one delivery mechanism, but a set of standards that we can all agree upon to say, how do we make sure that we can insert an ad into a box regardless of what brand is on that box?
And it sounds, listening to you all talk, as if the issue now is not a technology issue, it's an interoperability issue. It's what OR is trying to solve for, right?
So, I keep saying this, everybody's heard me say this, I feel like I've been talking about OR for 2 years. The basic premise was that we felt very strongly, having learned previous lessons, that interoperability was not going to work, was critical for scale, and that trying to cram an entire industry into a single stack was a fool's errand. And so our point was build some sort of underlying building block, hand it to everybody else, and make sure it is interoperable in and of itself and can plug into other things, and then let people go off to the races. But at least there's sort of there's a language we're all speaking on that baseline, and then whether you use Google as your solution or Freewheel or Xander, that it will work with all of those things.
And you've always said consistently that CES this year was going to be a big year in the progress of your initiative. Give us an update. How did it go?
It went really, really well. We actually had, I've said a couple of things recently about OR, one of which is I keep expecting to send an invitation out to the meetings and like 2 people respond. And so far everybody responds, which has been great because everybody has leaned in really hard and participated at a very high level, and that's been honestly pretty gratifying. We've also hit our milestones, which I think Zev finds to be one of the most amazing things ever, because we're owned by an OEM, and OEMs and the engineering queue for manufacturing is dicey.
Yes.
And we've hit all of our milestones, one of which was to have a live demo at CES, which we did. So we actually ran 6 different demos with members, 2 of which were live feeds broadcast into the Visio space at CES. We distributed the measurement spec. I'm getting feedback on the measurement spec from all of the people that received it, and your red lines, some of you are in this room, God help me how I aggregate all of that information and feed it back to the members. That's going to be a job in and of itself. We will start pushing the solution to Visio TVs in a firmware update next week, and we're on track to have 10 million TVs live by the upfronts.
So I want to do this as PC as possible and respectful of everybody in the room and glass half full. That is all great. But when we're talking about interoperability, there's also a lot of other devices that don't support it. So again, like we should continue to support these open standards, whomever comes up with them and however we can deploy them. But there are a lot of other companies that are continuing down the space that aren't necessarily operating by those rules and those standards. So we are still at a point where the cable system was 10 years ago, where one company was building one set of solutions, another company was building another set of solutions, and there's not an organized and agreed upon framework. All of those solutions 10 years later are working quite well for those companies, but they're not necessarily working great for the entire industry as a whole to be able to do what they need to get done. So I think we still have more work to do in terms of getting to the points that Dominic talked about earlier in terms of open standards and
that was right, gang.
together.
I mean, there's tremendous progress being made in all sorts of different areas, but often it's progress being made by quite disparate companies.
That's right.
And if Dominic is right that what we need to be heading for in this decade is greater interoperability, what else do we need as well as OR? Adam?
Chris brings up a great point. We need harmony across the infrastructure and underpinnings of how things are being delivered in terms of understanding how the data is coming through, understand the pipes, and make sure that, again, talking very programmatically here, but there's still not unification across each one of the different, whether it's DSPs or groups, to make sure you understand what's coming through in terms of from the data itself. So it's a unification answer. This is no different than, to your point, the cable business years ago of getting one sort of unification or system through. Also measurement as well, that there has to be one sort of measurement, impression-based buying, something like that, where you can then have validity to what's happening where it's a third party, and also then have this parity across all these groups.
And nobody wants to proliferate additional institutions or initiatives, but do we as an industry have the right set of initiatives and institutions in place to deliver that interoperability given those problems?
I don't think we do yet. I still think, to your point, there's different pockets being developed. There's different groups that are kind of going out in their different ways, which we all should. But I don't think we have that yet. I think it's still going to take some time. But look, as we all go our ways, we're all very cautious of, does this work? Is this it? And most of all, is the buying community going to recognize this? Is the buying community going to accept this? Are they going follow through in this, because it's a business, right? We're all, and if money doesn't follow through and start from there, then you've got to rethink what you're doing. So I think that's super important in all this, is to make sure you are working with the buying community to how this all works.
And the buy side's been pretty consistent, that they're very supportive of lots of these initiatives, but they're still not seeing that.
But there's multiple initiatives, but there's multiple groups and initiatives. I mean, this is no different than, and we've been saying this for years, right? So this is no different. That still stands. I do believe that the IP infrastructure, the IP delivery, will help to unify that in some way. So I think that is a great step, but there still needs to be that unity across. I don't know if it's ever going to change over time. I think we all want that, but I still think it's going to take a long time.
So we're just about out of time. So if we had one thing we do as an industry that comes out of maybe this retreat or something that happens this year, what's the initiative we need to launch to solve that problem or that set of problems in addition to what's already in place, if we don't have the right things in place today?
We have the right people focused on this. There's a lot of smart companies and there are a lot of smart people in this room that are going to figure it out. It's going to take some time. Technology will eventually evolve. We have the right infrastructure through IP-enabled devices and IP-enabled environments to figure this out. So I'm confident that we will. I think that we should there are other fundamental issues which we haven't talked about, that we don't have time to talk about, in terms of privacy and protection within IP environments. These are very, very important issues that we should be talking about today and walking out and saying, how are we going to solve the customers deserve privacy? How are we going to make sure that we're preserving the addressable ecosystem while delivering ads that are completely relevant to what it is that they're doing or watching at the industry-wide level? And then from a protection standpoint, to make sure that, as we move more and more inventory into IP-enabled, piracy is a problem. And it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And how do we make sure as an industry that, going back to signaling, how do we make sure that we're sending the right signals back and that we're not over-reliant on the wrong types of information, to make sure that we can healthily scale this business out and bring in a lot of really great, valuable brand marketer dollars into this environment?
Adam?
Day-to-day weeds, forecasting, frequency has to get better. There has to be a way to really do that properly for addressable. That'll help the day-to-day of the business grow, but I think it all stems from the business side of things, that there has to be more unity across, let's say, the operators to the programmers. If we see that time where the operators allow, or in some way become a service bureau, to allow addressable to come through with the programmers, so the programmers do not essentially know their audience like the operators do. It's an audience, the operators have their subscribers and they know them. If there's a way that can be shared, if there's a way that can be worked on from a business standpoint, that'll grow the business a lot more and a lot faster. And whether IP is a way to do it, fine, but I think that's a business decision that will completely change addressable, and I think that's the next step we will see.
So I'm going to answer that question from a short and narrow perspective, because it's just an easier answer. I mean, for us, selfishly, what I think is, and this is going to be no surprise to anybody, we need other OEMs to adopt the standard. I mean, we need a bigger footprint.
One quick thing is, with Jodie and the way I'm seeing this.
This is our final comment.
OEMs, are we seeing basically a remix of what operators are? The same concept, right? So they get a slice of inventory. They go ahead and take it from the programmers. It's the same concept of how we've seen operators for the past 15, 20 years. That's reinventing itself. And we're seeing that same mindset, that same type of business, where OEMs are that, or the hockey pucks, or the sticks, or the Samsungs OEMs, but the Rokus, they're basically an operator now.
Yeah, they're virtual MVPDs, for sure.
We are done on time. I feel like we started glass half full, moved back to empty, and now we're somewhere in the middle.
I'm super stoked.
Excellent. Thank you.